Hi everyone, I'm Ian Harvey, massage therapist. Today we're going to talk about the levator scapula, a muscle on the side of your neck that is very often not touched by massage therapists, or when it is singled out, it's often overworked. So we're going to try to find a nice happy medium here today using some myofascial techniques. Now, why would you want to target this muscle specifically? Well, I find that in 80 or 90% of stiff neck or crick in the neck situations, it's this muscle that's the culprit. Whenever I have someone who can't quite turn their head, oh, I slept on it wrong, if I have them turn their head and point to where they're feeling that place of impingement or that what feels like bone-on-bone contact, it's probably not. It's probably this thing in spasm. They'll point right here. They'll point to their transverse processes, and that gives me a good clue that, hey, this is the muscle that is at issue. If it's not here, sometimes they'll point back here, in which case we might be dealing with the paraspinals and possibly trapezius. So we're going to start with a nice anatomy review of levator and how it works, and then we're going to get a client on the table and I'm going to show you some nice myofascial techniques as well as some interesting pin and stretch stuff to get this to calm down, usually in just one session. If you'd like to skip ahead, click on the time codes down in the description. So levator scapula originates from the top 4 transverse processes of your cervical spine. So here, 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 and here, or thereabouts. It twines together into one single muscle that feels like a finger on the side of your neck, and that finger of muscle dips down anterior to trapezius here and inserts at the superior angle of the scapula. So, levator scapula does just what it sounds like. It elevates the scapula, it brings these points and this point closer together, and unlike trapezius, it doesn't upwardly rotate the scapula. In fact, it can rotate it downward just a little bit. It can also assist with lateral motion of the neck. Now, something to consider is that when the head is far forward, which is often the case when we see these head forward postures, as well as people who sit for 8 hours a day in front of a workstation, they will have their head jutted forward. And if you palpate your levator scapula and bring your head forward, you're going to feel it start to tense up. It's going to start to contract to try to pull back. It's in a bit of a tug of war with your head. So the farther forward your head goes, the more levator scapula is having to stay chronically tight. Now, I tend to think of this as a better explanation of why people get neck cricks than, oh, I just slept on it funny. I think that that's the culprit that is easiest to pin the blame on, but what's been happening for the years prior to that is the head has come forward and poor levator here has had to pull for its life. So if your client gets these cricks in the neck quite often, it could be very helpful for them if you talk to them about their desk ergonomics and about their activities and maybe give them a nice stretch like the one we'll do at the end of the video so that this head can come back just a bit, the shoulders can fall back, and levator doesn't have to be in such a high tension situation all the time. Now, before we get a client on the table, I'd like for you to be able to palpate levator scapula on yourself. You'll find that it has a unique texture, and once you feel it on yourself, you feel it on several different clients, you'll be able to hit that levator scapula 10 out of 10 times without accidentally working a little bit too far back or a little bit too far forward. You will find levator posterior to your SCM, so if you're not able to grasp your own SCM, that would be a skill that's useful for this. I've got a video on that, it's playing in the corner there. If you'd like to click on a link to that, there's one down in the description. So it's posterior to this SCM and it's anterior to your trapezius. So grab a hunk of trapezius and then follow it forward as it gets quite thin and tracks up the neck here. And in front of this little scroll of muscle, which is trapezius, you're going to find a finger-like bundle of muscle. It'll feel a little gristly, it'll feel a little twangy as you go across it, and that is levator scapula. And you'll feel that go all the way up those transverse processes. If you're tracking the very side of the neck, you're likely on levator. If you'd like to make sure that you're on that, first, feel for trapezius, come in front of that, and then do a shrug. If you feel a muscle bunch up, if you feel it contract, that's levator. You can then palpate backward and feel for trapezius again, so you can differentiate between the two. You can then follow that bundle of muscle down to the superior angle of your scapula. And to find that superior angle of your scapula, you can extend your arm, and that'll make that superior angle rotate forward just a bit, and you should be able to feel it poke up. Okay, I've got my friend Maria here with me.
Hi.
And, and I'm going to spread on a little bit of jojoba oil here, just a touch. I do want to work slowly, so I'm not going to use too much. And just a reminder about the anatomy. You can palpate levator scapula just posterior to the SCM and just anterior to trapezius. So feel free to follow trapezius up as it goes more and more superiorly. And just anterior to that, you'll feel a finger-like muscle. And you can follow that up all the way up toward the base of the skull. And down, you'll need to come in front of trapezius and make contact with that superior angle of the scapula. Now, when you're talking to your client, find out which side is worse for them. It tends to be unilateral. But something that I've noticed is that the side that they have difficulty turning toward isn't always the same side that they feel the pain on. So have them show you what they're not able to do. So Maria does not have a crick in her neck, but Maria, turn to your right just a little bit, and have them stop and then have them point out where they feel their pain. They might point on this side, they might point on this side. And that's just valuable information to know, because we are going to be working directly with that levator scapula. And it's useful information because we're going to be reevaluating it later. So start with just some easy warm-up. So very slow drawing up of this trapezius fascia, and because we're using a nice broad grip to start with, we'll be drawing up into the scalenes and coming up into the neck. We're creating some fascial traction of all of these lateral and posterior neck muscles. So we're not going to start by specifically targeting levator scapula. Do a few nice repetitions of that, and we're going to start slowly introducing movement. So by alternating sides here, I'm creating just a little back and forth movement of the head. And as I said in the intro, this is often something that we can deal with in one single session. This is one of the few cases of acute pain where I'm comfortable saying, I can probably get that about 50% better before you leave. And this fix, this ability to reduce that crick type sensation, it's not because we're breaking up a knot or getting rid of scar tissue. It's because we're convincing the nervous system that it doesn't need this spasm. If the person is unable to turn all the way to one side, it's because the levator scapula starts to lock up as they turn. And by slowly introducing movement, and by gently working with the fascia of this entire region, and with levator scapula in particular, we can convince the nervous system that rotation is okay, and that this muscle is not in any distress. And I find that by the end of the session, they usually have a good, at least half of their range of motion restored. So after we've done some bilateral warm-up, I'm going to move to one side, and we're going to do some easy two-handed petrissage. And I know I'm primarily working with trapezius right now, but I do find that trapezius can be involved. And using your thumb, you can start to outline the superior portion of this clavicle here. And we're drawing up into this lateral neck. I find that if we can get all of this to soften, that it sends the right message to this lateral neck fascia and to levator scapula. I'm going to do some spreading here. And Maria, allow your head to roll just a bit. If you find that your neck gets into an uncomfortable position, if it's starting to roll too far, please let me know, okay? Thank you. And that warning is especially important with people who have a crick in their neck. We want to keep them in a comfortable range of motion as we slowly expand it. So this particular move, I've got one hand, my left hand, the palmar surface is creating some fascial traction outward, laterally, as my fist travels superiorly along the side of the neck. This will often turn the head to the side just a bit, so it's a nice way of gently increasing this space here without just grabbing their head and turning it. And I find that this anterior fascia here in the chest is strongly related to the neck and how it turns. If you've ever pressed down into someone's pec tissue and found that it moved their head, you've experienced that phenomenon. So I'm just spreading them in opposite directions. Now that the head is over a bit further, we can continue our work with this trapezius and neck fascia. We can include some work down the shoulder. What I'm doing is I'm outlining this clavicle and I'm spreading the pec tissue. So think locally, think of this levator scapula, and act globally. We're working on all of the related structures. Everything that might be tight, pulling that head forward, and that might be contributing to this general tight situation in the neck. And once I've worked with this region for a while, things feel warm, things feel loose, I can start to work directly with levator. So to do that, I'm going to place one hand, my left hand here, so I'm going to be crossing my hands. I'm placing my left hand on the superior angle of the scapula. Feel for that finger-like projection of bone coming up from the scapula. And if you're working through trapezius here, that's just fine. No worries. Don't feel like you need to come anterior to that and scoop downwards. We're just depressing this superior angle, and we're interacting with that tendon of levator scapula. So once you've got that found and you've depressed it just a bit, we're going to be bringing the other set of fingers onto these transverse processes of the cervical spine. And you'll be able to palpate levator starting right now. So if you'd like to make sure that you're on the muscle, feel free to follow that ropey band of muscle up and make sure that it's posterior to SCM and anterior to the trapezius. And if it is, and if it seems to track with the transverse processes, then it's there. You can also feel for that unique texture. It's difficult to describe, but it doesn't feel like any of its neighboring muscles. So start near your other hand and press in toward those transverse processes. We're not really doing trigger point work. We're just sinking in a bit, making contact, and you may feel that tissue melt just a tiny bit. But if you don't, that's fine. I tend to stay here for about 1 or 2 good breaths, and then I move on. tracking with those transverse processes and keeping that levator scapula pinned down, we're kind of doing a fascial pin and stretch. We're not moving the neck, but we are grabbing that fascia, pulling it up, and then sitting for a little while. Come up some more and sit. I'm moving about an inch each time. Come up a little more and sit. All the way up to C1. And that is my main tool for working with levator scapula. Just a brief little pin and stretch that tracks all the way up the side here. And then I smooth things out. And another tool that I find very helpful here doesn't directly target levator. It targets this entire shoulder region. Grab as much of this shoulder tissue as you can, primarily trapezius, but we'll be tractioning much of the surrounding fascia. And now, Maria, I'd like you to very gently, not using much range of motion at all, shake your head no. So left to right very slowly, good. And continue doing that and take some easy deep breaths. So I'm applying a few pounds of pressure. I'm sandwiching all of this tissue between my thumbs and my hands. If this isn't comfortable for your thumbs, then you can probably do without this part, but I do find it helpful. If your client is going too fast here, which Maria, you're not, you're doing great, then do slow them down. And just have them turn their head so that they make contact with your hand and then turn away. And continue this for about 10 good breaths, or you can wait until you feel a nice softening between your thumbs and your fingers, which I just did, which is pretty cool. You don't always feel it, but it's fun when you do. And Maria, you can let your head come to rest. And then you can turn their head back to neutral. And I always work with both sides. So I would then come over to this other side and continue on in that fashion. And once you've worked with both sides, so Maria, go ahead and turn your head to the left and to the right and stop if you feel pain. So the other direction. Don't let them go too far when they test their neck like this. And come back to neutral. And then ask them if they still feel any pain. If they do, have them point it out, and you can do another repetition of that pin and stretch and of that fascial grab. Typically, after that first warm-up, pin and stretch, and hold, they'll have regained most of their range of motion, or enough that they are quite pleased with the situation. In that case, don't repeat anything, and call it good. And then to finish, some nice, easy traction is always nice. Just don't overdo it with this traction. Don't feel like you need to pull too hard. Don't feel like you need to tuck the chin. Don't feel like you need to stretch anything. This can just be a very gentle experience of having their head cradled. Again, all we're trying to do here is calm the nervous system, give it some new stimulus, so that it knows that it doesn't need to have that high tension spasm type response. Alright, so hopefully your client has some new freedom in their neck. They no longer have to turn their entire body just to turn their head to the side. What I want you to send them home with is the message that they don't need to be cranking this, they don't need to be stretching this as far as it'll go in order for it to get better. If they would like a stretch to do, there's an easy stretch that they can do that will possibly help with this, and that is very unlikely to aggravate it further. And it's kind of a fascial stretch. We're not going for the gusto here and trying to stretch this lateral neck as far as it'll go. Instead, we are clasping our hands behind our back. I know that's below frame, so you'll have to trust me that I did that. And now allow the shoulders to be loose. There's nothing that they need to be doing. And depress your shoulders down toward the ground, just about an inch. And now gently rock your head from side to side. Notice that I'm only using about 15 to 20 degrees of motion here. I'm not going for a new world record. When you have your client try this in your office, make sure that they don't overdo this. This should just be a very gentle stretch. Have them feel for that gentle stretch going down into their shoulder, and if they can barely feel it, they're doing it right. And this is something that they can do every day, possibly a couple of times a day. And this is what they should be doing instead of this stuff or this stuff when levator scapula is tending to go into crisis. We don't want to send this into spasm, and so we just want a gentle fascial stretch across here. Alright guys, let me know what you think. If you've got any ideas for future videos, I'm always interested in seeing what you would like to see. Thanks for watching, consider subscribing, and I will see you next time.